Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Jeff with Sockeye. Appreciate you taking the time to join our session today. I think we still have some others that are joining us, but it's just a little bit after the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. And today we're going to cover the TimberScan titanium for Sage Intacct. And I'm going to introduce Mike Carbonell. Some of you might have met Mike over the years. Mike is with Avid Exchange, and he's the Senior Director of Construction Sales. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Jeff. Good morning, everyone.
Hey, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to let you, I'm going to stop my sharing here, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and let you share out your screen. And please feel free to ask questions as we're going along today. I know it'll be a more interactive presentation. If you do, you can ask them out loud, or you can feel free to ask them through the Q&A panel. That might be the best way, and I can keep an eye on that for Mike.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. And I did turn the recording on, so we can make that available to folks afterwards, or those that were not able to attend.
Great. Okay. All right. So here we go. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this morning. So today what we're going to do is we're going to cover, as Jeff said, TimberScan titanium for Sage Intacct. I have just a couple of PowerPoint slides that we'll go through just to kind of set things up, set the stage. And then we will go right into the product and we'll walk through everything associated with TimberScan titanium, how it works, and we'll do this in kind of a workflow fashion where we'll take everything from the initial purchase through the payment process, and we'll walk it all the way through. So who are we? So Core Associates was founded in 2008, and we developed a product called TimberScan. TimberScan is and remains the only AP automation system that was designed exclusively for Sage 300 CRE. And what I mean by that is that we designed TimberScan with the idea that we're not going to deploy it to a number of different software solutions or ERP solutions. It's going to be designed for Sage 300 CRE. And that's the way we've designed TimberScan titanium. We've taken that same concept and we built it under the guise of designing it specifically for Sage Intacct. So hopefully what you'll see today are the tools that will allow you to be able to integrate directly with Sage Intacct from TimberScan titanium. One other comment about Core Associates, as I mentioned, that company was founded in 2008, but we were acquired by Avid Exchange in 2021. That has allowed us the opportunity to create what we refer to as a purchase to pay workflow solution. So we've designed an application that allows you to do everything from the initial purchase all the way through the payment process, and everything can be managed from within TimberScan titanium. We have more than 35,000 users worldwide of the product. And, we have just some stats on the number of employees and where we're located, various things like that. So we're talking about purchase to pay. And the idea is we never want to have to touch the paper all along the way. So that starts with acquiring the invoices. And there are different ways in which we go about doing that. We'll talk about the different ways in which you can accept and acquire an invoice. There is optical character recognition functionality built into the application. And I'll show you some examples of how simple and easy it is to be able to utilize the OCR. And then it's also built around the concept of mobile approvals. So the ability to take an invoice, once it's been acquired, process it quickly, easily route the invoice off to approvers without having to go through a very complicated process of determining who the invoice needs to get routed to. It's all done in the workflow rules. And then once it's at the approver level, the approvers have the ability to go in and they can approve basically, as it says, on the go, meaning that they can use any type of device to be able to approve an invoice. So the idea and the concept behind this purchase to pay that we're referring to is to allow you to have everything managed in one system, on one platform, one data entry point, seamlessly integrated with Sage Intacct. So we've got the automated workflow, which we talked about before. We designed it, as I mentioned, for Sage Intacct. We took the AP entry screen and we replicated what happens in Sage Intacct and pulled all of that functionality into TimberScan Titanium. And then we also create on the back end what we refer to as electronic packets, meaning if you were inside Sage Intacct and you wanted to drill down to the invoice level, you can see everything from the initial invoice image through the supporting documents down to the actual payment process, or excuse me, the payment document. This is the last slide that I'm going to show. And it's basically to try and set up what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, which is the workflow. So everything's going to start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. And regardless of how you receive that invoice, you're going to go through the steps of acquiring the invoice. Very simple, very straightforward, easy to do. Once the invoices are acquired, they're going to be sent to what we refer to as initial data entry or AP invoice entry. So they're not going off to the approvers yet. They're going to start in AP entry and then go off to the approvers. But what's nice here is that, again, it replicates what would happen as if you were keying it directly into Sage Intacct with some other tools that you have at your access. You create the workflow rules to be able to allow the invoice to be routed off to the approvers. They don't have to be fully coded invoices. You could have an invoice that has, for example, maybe a project number, but not any of the cost coding information. And you can still send it off and let the approvers do their approving and coding on their end. Then once the approval process is finished, those invoices automatically update Sage Intacct. There's no export, import, any of that. It's all seamlessly integrated. So it's basically almost like a kind of a 360-degree extension of Sage Intacct, where it pulls and pushes data back and forth as if it were just another application that's linked to the program. On the back end, when you're cutting your checks, we also have the ability to manage that process and automate it so that you don't have to necessarily send checks out to a physical printer. The system will allow you to be able to basically print them to what we call the TimberScan Titanium solution, have it, and then you're able to manage them from within Titanium, and I'll show you all of that as well. So at this point, what I think I'll do is we're going to jump out of the PowerPoint and we're going to go into the application. Now I've already logged into both TimberScan Titanium and I've logged into Sage Intacct. We're going to start in Titanium. And what I did when I logged in is just to kind of give you a little bit of navigation. Very simple, very straightforward how you navigate through the system. All of your menu items are listed here in the side panel. And as you select anything, you see how it opens up the various options for data entry. Same thing if I went into document automation and so forth. Now, when I opened up the application, I did so with my dashboard open. What I like about the dashboard is it can give you different views very quickly, in fact, instantaneously. So what I mean by that is, let's say that I'm at an administrative level. So I could potentially see everybody in the system. I can look and say, okay, for all of our users, all of our AP entry and approvers that are in the system today, where do we stand? Well, we've got 20 outstanding invoices right now. Here's our outstanding dollar amount. Obviously, you notice how I haven't paid anything in a while, so everything's overdue. But you get the idea. And then in the graphs, these pie charts, as you start to hover the mouse around the pie chart, you notice how it's starting to pop up these little tooltips that will show me, for example, that particular vendor and the outstanding dollar amount. Same thing if you do this by project, by task, and there are different options that you can choose for your graphs. These are just the ones that I chose. what I like is that, again, talking from an administrative level, I could say, you know what, let me just go in and I want to focus in on a particular person. So I'm going to look at Leanne and I'm going to say, okay, how many outstanding invoices does Leanne have? Now I see Leanne has 10 outstanding invoices. And again, I can, start to look at, looks like most all of her outstanding invoices are associated with this A1 electric vendor. She's working on these 2 projects, for example, and she has these various tasks that she's working on. So it gives you that quick, easy ability where I don't have to go out and run any types of reports or inquiries or anything like that. I can just right here from the dashboard, I can select different people or just see it at the very top level. Okay, so let's do this. Let's start off. Let's go in and we'll start by talking about invoices as they arrive at your door. And regardless of how you receive those invoices, to get them into Titanium, what you're going to do is choose the acquire function. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to fill in a couple of fields here. And I'll come back and we'll talk about this in a moment. But there are several ways in which you can go about acquiring invoices or any document for that matter. So one thing you can do is you can just drag and drop. So if I have an invoice, for example, that's in a file or a folder, or maybe something that I wanted to grab from an email, I can just drag and drop it. Say I want to continue. And I just pulled that invoice into the viewer here, as you see today. So now if I want, not only am I able to see the invoice in this format, I can obviously make it larger or smaller on the screen. You can set up the thumbnail view. So if I want to see, maybe I've got multiple pages here, and I'll show you some examples with multiple pages with the invoices in the thumbnail, and so that I can just scroll up and down to the various invoices as I need. So this is an example of drag and drop. A couple of other things that you can do. Let's say that if you receive invoices by mail, what you would do is you would put them onto your scanning device. You're going to scan them to a file that we're going to link to TimberScan Titanium, and then you just open up the file, and all of those scanned invoices are in the file. You just retrieve them from the file all at one time in a batch, and they open up together. And I'm going to show you an example of something like that, very similar here in just a second. But the third option is that more and more companies have a designated AP email address where they've asked vendors and subs to email their invoices. So what Titanium allows you to do is you can just, the system basically has an email monitoring program, and it's looking at that designated email address. It's taking the attachments from the email and dropping them into a folder or file, and then you just pull them out of the file. So again, here's my example here. I'm just going to come in, say we're going to grab some invoices. I open up the file. Here are all of my emailed invoices. I can just grab this whole group, all at one time, open them up, and here they all are sitting in the viewer for me. If I had any, multi-page invoices where I needed to split the pages, you can just right-click and say you want to split. If I needed to get rid of an invoice, you can just delete it out anytime you need to. So I'm basically just setting up and looking at these invoices very quickly. And then I hit the acquire button, and those invoices get acquired and they get sent on to AP invoice entry, which is where we're going to go in a couple of minutes. Now, I just talked about email monitoring, and we also have a tool that allows you to do kind of an automated acquire process and bypass everything that you just saw me do. Let me back out of here for just a second. So each time that I go into the acquire screen, you notice how I'm filling in these 2 fields, and I'll just explain them very quickly. It's simple. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, as I'm acquiring these invoices, who in data entry is going to be getting those invoices? Who do we want processing them? It could be multiple people. You can have people set up in groups. You can have multiple groups, but you're basically just saying, here's who they're going to be assigned to an AP entry. And then I'm going to say, what type of documents are they? Are they regular invoices? Are they any other type of document besides an invoice, or are they checks or payment records? As long as they're invoices, then we're just going to go ahead and we're going to retrieve the invoices, and they'll go into the AP invoice entry queue, which we're going to go there in a minute. So we define that. Then we go out and we pull those invoices from the file. So even if they're emailed, I still have to define who they're going to go to, define the document. I have to go pull them out of the file, and then I have to go and acquire them. So what we did is we set up a program called Auto Acquire. What Auto Acquire does is it says, okay, let's just bypass that acquire step altogether. Now I can do this using a wildcard, meaning anything that comes into this AP email address that I've set up, it will acquire it. Or I could actually get more specific. I could say anything that's coming from, billing at a1electric.com or something like that. I know that when I get an email from A1 Electric, that it's coming into my AP email address. They're sending me my invoices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to automatically assign them to this person or group in data entry. If I had a scenario where we had multiple invoices, or multiple invoices that they attach together, I would look for something on the invoice to be able to create a separation or split them. And then I can also utilize our optical character recognition tool so that when this invoice gets to AP invoice entry, basically no one had to go out and acquire the invoice. They didn't even have to pull it out of a file. They didn't have to pull it out of the email. It got automatically acquired. And if there was OCR associated with it, it got dropped into AP invoice entry. And a lot of the data could have already been pre-coded, pre-populated. So that's how simple it could be to actually go out and acquire invoices from certain vendors, or all of your vendors if you wanted to do it this way. Okay, so with that, let's go to step 2 in the process, which is the AP invoice entry. So back here in data entry, you notice that there are 2 separate fields here. One's called AP bill entry, the other is called purchasing entry. The reason that we designed it this way is because if we're matching an invoice to purchase orders or receivers from Sage Intacct, there are additional fields that are required in order to get that invoice attached to that purchase order and receiver. If you were processing, let's just say, an overhead invoice that didn't require you to have to attach a purchase order or match it to a PO and receiver, you could go into the bill entry screen, have less fields that you need to use to be able to get the invoice processed and get it on its way quickly and very easily. I'm going to start in the purchasing entry queue. And I'm going to start by, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back and I'm going to acquire a brand new invoice. Let's go out here. Let's take George Wireless. Okay, I'm just going to say acquire. It's going to take a second. It's going to update the AP entry queue. And now you notice how both the bill entry queue and the purchasing entry queue have been incremented, and they now have 8 invoices in them. Now, basically, whenever you acquire an invoice, it drops into both of these queues. And then you choose which one of these queues you want to process from. So let's go back to purchasing here for a moment. And I'm going to bring up this George Wireless invoice. And we're going to use this as our example just to start with. And then I'm going to back up for a couple minutes. Now, you notice when I open this up, I get this message that says capture template was not matched. However, you're noticing that there are certain fields on the invoice that are highlighted. And if you look down here, you'll also notice that certain fields have already been pre-coded. The invoice number, which is over here, the bill number, already filled in. The billing date, the due date, those fields have already been filled in based on what it read from the invoice itself. So we built into the application a tool called Smart Extraction. And what Smart Extraction does is it says, okay, go out and read these fields. And when it sees something that says bill number or invoice number, automatically pull it and populate the invoice entry screen for me. Now, let's say that, let's go grab an entity here. We'll say GC. A couple of other things that I'm able to do here with the AP entry screen. So I have the invoice image here on the upper part of the window. I have the data entry grid down at the bottom. Then I have some control buttons here across the bottom. I'm going to talk about several of these here before we go through and process this invoice. But you notice how the invoice, I can't really see the whole invoice here with the data entry screen in the way. So you can take this and you can move things around. Down here under more, I could just say, okay, let's go to change. I'm now going to move that invoice to the left-hand side of the screen and my data entry screen to the right. So now I can see the invoice image in full view, and I have my data entry on the other side. Let's bring it back for a moment. Other thing I could do, let's say that I have a second screen. I can just disconnect the invoice image, and I can just go ahead and move it off to a second screen. So now I have the invoice on one screen, and I have the data entry on the other. And anytime you want to bring it back, it's just this little up and down arrow, and it just brings it back for you. So very simple, very easy. The other thing to note is that all of these fields in TimberScan Titanium in the AP entry screen are the exact same fields that we would see if I went into Sage Intacct right now. So if I go into Intacct and I look at the AP entry screen, the bill entry screen, it's going to show me all of these fields in the exact same order. And they all function the same way. So the purpose here is that we wanted to make it as seamless for you when you're implementing the system and you're processing on a day-to-day basis to use something that you are familiar with. Now, let's talk about some things here. If I said I just want to go ahead and I can search for George Wireless, I can do it one of two ways. I can either click on the spyglass here, and now I can go out here and I can search my vendor file and see if I can find George Wireless, if there is one. Or the other thing you can do is you can just start typing from the screen here, and it goes out and it will search the vendor file for you automatically. So I'm able to pull in my vendor code for me. Now, let's see what else we need here. If we don't need anything else, we probably don't. Okay, so let's do one other thing. Let's say that I know I'm going to be getting more invoices from George Wireless. And when I get an invoice from them, since the smart extraction was able to populate some of the header information for me, I want to populate more. I want to make sure that it populates and plugs in the vendor number for me automatically. So what I can do is down here under more again, I just click on this option that says add a capture template. We'll just name it here on the fly. It will go out to the template program. And I'm not going to do anything else at this point, but just say that that's what we want to do is just create the template, save it. And then when it returns, notice how it has this little plus sign above the vendor code. So what that's doing is that's saying, okay, as soon as I click this, now what it does is it saves that field with the template. So literally the very first time that I acquired an invoice from George Wireless, I've now been able to identify and attach the vendor number so that from this point forward, in addition to getting the invoice number or bill number, the billing date, the due date, the dollar amount, it's also going to pre-populate all of my George Wireless invoices going forward. And you can do this with any of these fields. If I said, I know everything that's coming in is going to come from, my entity is always going to be GC, I can just save that. So it gives you that flexibility where very quickly, very easily, I'm able to set up a template and it will now start reading this information and populating the screen for me without me having to go through and fill in any of that info. So it's not a, there's a lot of conversation around the idea of AI, right? Where OCR it's kind of a learning tool where after I've acquired several hundred George Wireless invoices, it finally determines that this is a George Wireless invoice. What we did is we said, okay, let's just acquire one invoice. We'll apply the vendor code, and then automatically from this point forward, every invoice that comes in, it will automatically pre-code George Wireless for us. Now you can do some other things here. If I'm here and I'm on the vendor code and I click on the history button, it goes out and it does a history for me and shows me every invoice associated with George Wireless. So if I wanted to just take a look and see, okay, what are the invoices that we've already processed, and even just call up the invoice image or see how they've been coded, whatever I want, I can just click on the plus sign here. And now I can see what, what jobs or what projects, what tasks, what cost types were associated with this. So you're able to, with the flexibility here of being able to see as much information as you need on any field that you're on. So if I were down here and I plugged in a project, we put in, let's just say this one here, I can do the same thing. I can do the history on that. And now I see all of my project data associated with that particular project. So it's all right here available to me. I can view it. I can see how, the fields have been coded. Here's all the line items for this one particular, item down here. So all of this is available to you at any given time in easy access when you're in AP invoice entry. Now, ultimately, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead. If we needed to attach any supporting documents, we can do that. And then ultimately, we're just going to go ahead and save and route that invoice, and it's going to route it off to the approvers. And it does so based on the business rules or workflow rules that you design behind the scenes. Now, you could say, well, we're just going to send this off to the project manager for, project 20003. We can read the project manager information or credentials right from the project file inside Intacct and assign it automatically based on that criteria. Or you could say, well, no, we have multiple approvers. So, whoops, let me go back here. We have multiple approvers. So what I want to do is I don't want to just not, arbitrarily send it off to just that one person. I want it to go to multiple people. So you set it up with the business rules to go to multiple people. It can have thresholds, all of that set up in the workflow. And then you're just basically coming in here. You're looking at the data, perhaps doing whatever coding needs to be done. You save and route and off it goes. And I think I'd mentioned this before, but you can partially code invoices. So if I knew the project that this was associated with, but that's all I knew, I could still go ahead and save and route the invoice, send it off to the approvers, and then the approvers would come in and they could finish the coding. And that's determined by, how much you want them to be able to do. Do you want them to code, or do you want them to perhaps just put a note on the invoice and, in the note, just say, this is what, how I need this to be coded. So all of that is something that is an option to you. Let's go back and look at one other thing in the purchasing entry queue. I'm going to bring up this invoice here. I think it's for A1. Yep, A1 Electric. All right, so you notice here that the Smart Extraction tool not only found the invoice number or the bill number, the billing date, the due date, but it also recognized the subcontract number associated with this particular invoice. So now look what it did. Because it was able to find that subcontract or PO number, it pre-populated all of these fields, and it also pre-coded the invoice for me. So I've now basically acquired an invoice for A1 Electric where it was able to recognize the subcontract number. It found it, populated all of the fields for me, populated the line items. I don't have to touch the keyboard. I could simply go ahead and save and route, and off it goes. Sends it off to the approvers. And I'm not sure if I have any supporting documents. I'll take a look here. I do. So if I wanted to come in here and I wanted to see, if maybe I've got a purchase order or a receiver or something like that, I can view it. Here's that PO. And I just simply come in here and I just say I want to attach it, and it will just attach it to that particular invoice before I save and route, and off it goes. Okay, so those are the basics of the AP invoice entry. Lots of information that you have literally at your fingertips, with the ability to create those OCR templates and read information automatically, all the way down to extracting the PO number or subcontract number and having it fill the distribution line items. Now, as I mentioned before, this is all tied directly back to the Sage Intacct purchasing and receiving application. So when we look at transaction types up here, if this is associated with a receiver or whatever it might be, I'm able to go through and pull that information, and it's just going to, it can pull the receiver info just as easily as it can pull the purchase order. And it can, in essence, create that three-way match where you've already created the purchase order, you already created the receiver. Now I'm processing the invoice against that receipt. Okay, so now off we go to the approval side. You do have, a series of reports and inquiries in the system, which we'll talk about in a little while. But if I needed to be able to go out and quickly look and isolate and see by project or maybe by user where invoices were, I can quickly look. I can see, okay, here's Leanne again. Here are the invoices that she's managing. So again, this is beyond the dashboard, but just giving me more ways and more tools for me to be able to manage and quickly view and see the status of where things stand. There's a notification system that you can utilize where you determine how often you want to be able to send a notification to someone to let them know that they have invoices to approve. And in the notification system, you can also set up alerts. So you could say, well, invoices that are with someone for greater than 5 days, or they're within 3 days of the discount date, you can send alerts to let them know that they need to get those invoices approved. So let's jump over to the workflow here. Let's say that I'm going to become an approver for a couple minutes. I'm going to open up my workflow task queue. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to just try and shrink the screen down here for a second. But let's open up an invoice. And let's do this. Okay. So this is probably not a great simulation. I'll try and make this a little bit smaller. But basically what I'm trying to show is if I were an approver and I'm on my phone, I'm not in the office, I'm out at a project site or I'm somewhere else, I can just call up an invoice on my phone. And I'm able to see the invoice info. I'm able to see the actual invoice image as you see here. I have my coding data over here on the right-hand side. And I have all of my control buttons down here at the bottom of my screen, which I can reject an invoice from here if I want. I can attach supporting documents if I have any that I need to attach. I can put an invoice on hold. If you reject or put the invoice on hold, you have to put a reason in as to why you're doing so. That way, if someone else wants to know what the status is, why did Mike reject this invoice or why did he put it on hold, there's a reason as to why I did that. Now here, you notice how the coding screen takes a little different view. So now I'm in here and I can say, okay, I'm going to go through and I'm going to start coding my this particular invoice to this particular project. And if you notice that everything that I'm doing is directly linked to Sage Intacct, where I'm getting my, my project, my task, my cost type, all of that information is coming directly from Intacct. So it's not like I've got to go out and try to build anything. It's all seamlessly integrated as if I'm working from within Intacct right now. And then I could just simply go in and I could say, okay, you know what, I'm done. Let's just go ahead and approve that invoice. So down here, I just say, I want to approve it, and off it goes. So the idea and the concept is approvals from anywhere, approvals on the go. Now, of course, if I'm sitting at my desk and I want to, I just want to come in and just go ahead and approve from my desk, then I could just switch this and say, you know what, let's go to the grid view. Let's go back to where we were before. And this looks obviously very similar to what we saw previously. So I can just go through and I can approve this way. Make any changes that I need to make. And then I just go ahead and approve the invoice. And again, if there are other levels of approval, it goes on to the next approver or approvers. Could be based on a threshold or something like that. And then ultimately, the final approval will send that invoice over to Sage Intacct. Not only does it send the invoice data, but it sends the images along with it. So if I were in Sage Intacct, I thought I was in there, maybe I'm not. Let's go back in. We'll go to GC. Accounts payable. Okay. So if I'm in here and I want to take a look at a particular transaction, maybe this A1 Electric transaction, what we've done is not only did we update all of the Sage Intacct data, but down here I can just click on and open the attachment, and I can see that A1 Electric invoice. And if this were, if there were any other documents associated with it, I would see those as well. Now, a couple of other things that we do, again, back here, we also create what's called an approval page that gets attached to the invoice. It's done so automatically. And it's basically showing me every iteration of that invoice. So who acquired it originally, who entered the data on the invoice, who approved it, and who updated Sage Intacct with that information. So it tracks basically an audit log of every single invoice in the system. So now let's go to the final step in the workflow. Let's say that we have now processed the invoices from the perspective of we managed the workflow, we sent the invoice over to Sage Intacct, and then in Intacct, there's the ability to go in here and actually do payment records. So let's go back one step. And we go into, let's just say we go into do a check run. So we're going to do the check run. Basically, what the system allows you to do is instead of actually physically sending those checks out to a printer, we've inserted a tool, and it's a little hard for me to show you because we don't have anything in our queued up here to run the check run with, but we've inserted a tool. It's called Print to Avid. And what it does is it says, instead of sending those checks out to a physical printer, we're going to send them to TimberScan Titanium, and we're going to manage them from within here. We're going to manage that payment process. So if you had a scenario where you said, well, what we normally do is we print out the check, and then someone has to take the check, attach it to the invoices, and then hand that off to someone for them to be able to sign off or approve that particular payment. So we've simulated or replicated that in our pay control system, and then we'll talk about the pay inquiry, which is kind of the last step of this process. So in pay control, what I can do is I can come out here. Bear with me, I may have gotten logged out. Nope. Okay. And let's just say, for example, I'm going to isolate this second payment. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to say, bring that up. And basically what it does is, so when we executed that print to Avid function over in Sage Intacct, it sent what looks like a check that it would have sent to the printer, but it created it and sent it into TimberScan Titanium, assigned the Intacct check number with the check stub and the invoices that the check is paying. Now, this only happens to be paying one invoice, so it's very straightforward. And you notice how it automatically attached the invoice and any of the supporting documents over here on the left-hand side. So if I were a check approver or check signer, I could come in here, I could look at this, and I could say, this looks great. This is the invoice that we needed to pay. Everything looks good. And I go ahead and approve it. And I'll talk about what approving does in a minute. But you could also put that payment on hold. You can void it, but voiding doesn't actually physically go back into Intacct and void. It sends a message to the person who executed the check run to let them know that they need to go into Intacct and void that particular transaction, because we're not going to actually send it out. If we approve, now let's say we're putting it on hold, it could be a number of reasons, right? We could be waiting for the return of a lien waiver, or it could be, you know, that there's some other compliance issue. You can set up notifications again so that you can continually notify and alert people that, you know, you put this payment on hold. Have we received the lien waiver back yet? And then if you say you want to approve it, what it does is it will release that payment to the Avid Pay Network. So think of Avid Exchange as a financial institution, because they are. So it works like a bank where they would actually issue the payment on your behalf. And there are three options with which the vendor will choose how they want to be paid. One could be a virtual card, a 16-digit merchant card. Second would be to be paid by ACH, basically, you know, direct deposit, if you will. And the third would be to be paid by a regular check. Some vendors still want to be paid by check, which is fine. But Avid Exchange would issue that check on your behalf. And the other part that you have available to you is the inquiry to be able to see the status of any payment at any given time. Now, what this does when you release this to the Avid Pay Network is you also absolve yourself of any issues with check fraud or not having to maintain, for example, all of your ACH or ACH or direct deposit information yourself. That's all done by Avid Exchange. And then in here, if I come into the pay inquiry, just do a random search here, we'll bring up everything. You know, here's my list of payment transactions that have been made. And I could isolate, for example, this Nations Bolt hardware. Here's my check number that was issued. This came directly from Intacct. Here's the bank account it was drawn from. You know, I've got all my information, the dollar amount. It shows me that this check was cleared. It also shows me how it was paid. This is by virtual card. This is by Avid Paycheck, so on and so forth. Now, let's just say, for example, that Nations Bolt said, hey, we didn't receive payment on that. So I can look here, I can see in the inquiry, yes, it looks like it cleared. And I can just go ahead and call up the proof of payment document, has all the details. I can then send that off to that particular vendor to let them know this is what we have in our records. And this proof of payment document also gets attached to the invoice automatically. So again, when I was in Intacct a few minutes ago, and I called up that invoice transaction that we saw before, if I wanted to, like, you know, if this had been that particular invoice that I selected, if that invoice had already been paid, then I would see that proof of payment document attached to the invoice along with any supporting documents. And that is the completion of the workflow for TimberScan Titanium for Sage Intacct. So it's basically everything from the initial purchase through the pay process, all managed from within this application, TimberScan Titanium, and all done so, you know, hypothetically, without ever having to touch a piece of paper. And with that, Jeff, I guess we could open it up for any questions if anyone has.
Yeah, Mike, okay, thanks. I'm gonna unmute the folks up. So if anybody wants to, they can ask some questions. I haven't seen any come through the chat, Mike. I know you covered a lot. It was pretty thorough, and I really appreciate it. Maybe if you have your contact info, Mike, I don't know if you do, if you want to flash that up there, feel free. Again, appreciate everybody's time today, and please feel free, like I said, to reach out to Mike, or I will show my stuff here. If you don't have it, Mike, I can flash mine up here, no problem.
Yeah, I am. Unfortunately, I did not put my contact info in my PowerPoint. So
That's all right. That's all right. It's all good. I'm going to share mine out here, and
yep.
if I can get mine up on the fly here. got me struggling as well too. I use Teams more than I use
Yeah.
and I use Zoom these days, so almost forgot how to do it. But please feel free. My contact information is on the screen. I know quite a few of the folks that are on here today, or you can reach out to your Intacct account manager, whether you use Joel or Nicole. They'll be able to help you guys as well. So again, Mike, appreciate it. Great job today. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, be sure and let us know. We're happy to address them or set up a more detailed presentation for your team if needed. So
Great.
everybody have a great rest of your day.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.